But that's not how you live. That's such a lie. You're giving
What do you
yourself an illusion of the way that you exist.
What do you
so
mean?
how can you prove that your wife loves you?
A skeptic attempts to debunk Johnathan Pageau's faith, who is a Christian, and ends up regretting it. Okay, now this is on Jake Newfield's channel, and Jake Newfield titled this video, Johnathan Pageau, Heated Debate, Is Christianity Real?
Do you mind if I press you? Like, I don't want to take up the whole call with this, but okay. Because I can't help myself. So here's my question. How do you know that that the creation of the Bible was divine and that the stories are a reflection of reality? How do you know that's the case and that it's not the case that humans wrote it over generation and that you know that the Bible was divinely inspired and not just written by humans and made up?
It is written by humans.
How do you know it's not made up stories? You're probably sick.
No, what do you mean? Like, I'm not sure what you totally mean by made up stories.
What I mean is
let me say it clearly. What I mean is that there is a manner to which we care about made up stories to a certain level, but that level has a limit. There's a limit to the extent to which we care about made up stories. We tend to care about stories that consolidate our identity, that consolidate our place in the world. Those stories are not made up. They are transmitted. And in their transmission, it is possible that they change, but they're not someone who one day sat down and made up a story. They are a memory that gets contracted over time, right? So it's like the memory gets contracted for reasons we could talk about. But the idea that this is someone who sat down and made up these stories, it's like, you know, that's true of Star Wars, but Star Wars does not found civilizations. I mean, people...
Yo, this man's a freaking genius, bro. So the premise, made up stories, and he's like, yo, you're thinking about a book, about a collection of books. First of all, they are written by humans. Second of all, you're thinking about them as if it's a category of fiction, but you're removing that these books have completely revolutionized everything about society. These collections of books completely revolutionized everything about society. And so you're starting with faulty presuppositions is where I think he's going with this.
But it doesn't found civilization. So stories that are told to be the origin of people, they are the bringing together of memory and transmission, express the reason why we exist together. And so the Bible stories, they necessarily have to be that, you know, not just this Bible stories, but the Iliad and the Odyssey and the Greek myths and all of these stories, they're not people who came up with them. That's not how any of this works. It is people who are telling stories that they've heard and are retelling them in a way that can be understood by the people to who they're speaking. Does that make sense? Like, so in an oral culture, that's true, but it's the same thing that happens when you inscribe them in a text.
I'm probably doing a poor job articulating it. So another way for me to kind of approach it is, how do you know Jesus Christ was a divine person that was killed and resurrected? Like, whether or the talk, like my question is really, how do you know that the supernatural things described in the Bible happened? And I would imagine that your response, I don't want to speak for you, but I would imagine your response is something along the lines of, you know, if we accept the premise that the Bible is divine, then that as a premise absolutely justify, you know, that can explain how something supernatural can happen. But let me not answer the question for you. So how do you know these supernatural?
He's like, oh yeah, your answer is going to be circular. The Bible is divine, therefore the stories are true. The stories are true, therefore the Bible is divine. Now watch, listen, look at Jonathan's face. You got to zoom in on his face. It's like he's like, oh man.
For the resurrection, you know, you name it. How do you know that happened? It was supernatural.
The first thing to say is that the purpose of telling a story of a miracle is not to prove that it happened. It's like the modern materialist and the modern secularist has completely forgotten the reason why we remember things and the reason why we say things. You know, it's like the reason why we recount miracles is because of what they mean and also because of what they afford, and not because of we are trying to prove that it happened. The first reason why I care about the miracles that are described in the Bible is because of what they afford. Is because of what they reveal about reality and what they make possible to participate in.
I have no doubt that they have incredible lessons. My question is just, do you believe in them or not? And your answer, I'm not clear on your answer.
He just keeps laughing. Okay, so Jonathan's approaching this from a worldview apologetic standpoint. He's not going to argue with him about how many manuscripts of the New Testament letters there are. He's not going to argue with him about the witnesses of the resurrection and the women coming to see the empty tomb first and how women in that society wasn't cultured. And if you were to doctor up a story like this, you wouldn't tell it this way. Like, he's not having that Sean McDowell, William Lane Craig conversation. He's talking about it from a very macro level. And the more he keeps pressing, the more Johnathan just keeps laughing at him and just completely cutting his arguments off at the feet, which is incredible.
My answer is yes. My answer is I do believe it.
But in terms of, did they happen? Like,
They happened, and the way they're described is the best way you could describe them for us to care about
So
them.
my question is, how do you know they happened?
How do you know that anything happened before your life?
Here's how you know.
How do you know that anything happened outside of your own experience?
Yeah, so we have an accepted tradition of like the reason we know that
we have an accepted tradition.
Yeah.
Just repeat after you because it's the same.
we have sure. Like,
You have an accepted tradition. I'm just going to repeat after you. How do you know anything happened? We have an accepted tradition. We have an accepted tradition.
He said, I'll just repeat after you because it's the same. That's what he said.
Wow. I'm gonna use your argument against you in terms of how you know anything in reality is actually real.
Wow, this is amazing.
You trust certain authorities to consolidate reality. And you accept what those authorities have given you to be history, to be the experience outside of yours. All experience outside of yours is mediated by trust.
I think that the way that we know, let's say, for example, that George Washington was the first president, or that Christopher Columbus sailed across the ocean, or that the Mayans had this thriving civilization, is that we have a certain threshold for evidence. And if we find a fossil of a dinosaur and then another fossil, we put them together and we say we think dinosaurs existed. And so I'm not a scientist, but the scientific process dictates that if you meet a certain threshold of evidence, and that evidence has like hard defined criteria.
Okay, now Jake, if you're watching this, I'm gonna say this. Johnathan doesn't go this direction, but how pretentious of it for someone to assume that there is no scientific threshold that a William Lane Craig and a Dr. Sean McDowell can lay out for you about why the bodily resurrection is a reliable event that likely happened. Okay, at the very least, go and sit with the best of the best.
Yeah.
Before you
press Johnathan
Pageau on it, right?
Yeah. We know that dinosaurs existed, that the earth is round, that Christopher Columbus, all these things. And so that's the answer to your question of how do we know something existed before the lifetime? There's a threshold of evidence with the parameters set by the scientific method. And if that threshold is met, that's how we form scientific conclusions. And if you say to me, hey, I think 500 years ago, human beings had wings and could fly, I would say, show me the evidence. And and maybe you could show me evidence, like maybe there's some drawing somewhere, but unless that evidence met the threshold prescribed by the scientific method, I would say it falls short.
So he only needs a drawing to be convinced that humans had wings and could fly, but a daggone whole book doesn't meet the criteria, I guess.
A book
with manuscripts and
with manuscripts, 40 authors over thousands of years across multiple languages, and so again, I think Jake means well, but I think his entire the framing of this is silly. Like the framing of this to me is just a silly way to frame these questions.
Do you believe that the way we ascertain truth about the past has to do with a certain threshold of evidence?
You notice he never gives us what that threshold is. It's an arbitrary threshold.
Yeah, it's arbitrary. Yeah.
Right. And so Johnathan, watch how Johnathan handles this.
No, I think that's bull. I think it's nonsense.
Do you think so?
It's actually not how you ascertain truth, both either in your life and because. Okay, how about this? Let me push you this way.
Yeah.
So how do you know that the people who are presenting that evidence to you aren't lying, Jake?
So
have you seen the evidence yourself? Let me ask you that. Have you seen the evidence yourself? Did you hold the archaeological piece in your hand? Did you read the ancient manuscript?
No, but I could.
You trust them, right? You trust them.
Well, yeah.
You trust them.
Yeah.
Well, that's the answer, man. The answer is trust. That's how it works.
That you are going through life trusting a bunch of things you cannot always independently verify. You didn't look at the archaeological evidence to know if George Washington existed.
So how do you know Jesus was real? You didn't read the Dead Sea Scrolls.
This is a silly it's a silly point. So Johnathan goes, no, you are actually going through life trusting a lot more than you think you're trusting, relying on the authority and the expertise of other people way more than you think you are.
It actually is held in trust. And so we have witnesses of things happening in the first century, witnesses that we trust, that I trust, and I trust those witnesses, and therefore I believe that it happened. Yeah, we have multiple witnesses that have experienced something, and I trust that it happened.
Got it.
And I trust that it happened not because of the witnesses, but because of what it affords me.
Right.
Because you're confusing things together. You're confusing a raw like evaluation of a fact or an event and something which is not only a fact or an event, like, did you drop your pencil on the ground today? And then I could have filmed it or whatever. But we're talking about something which is civilization affording. Which is world affording, which basically is at the origin of an entire world. Let's say around 1,000 years, at least 1,000 years. Right? Everybody in Europe believes certain things to have happened. Right. And then at some point, someone started to try to disprove that they happened. What is their motivation?
To pursue truth. And, if they find new information that proves it wrong, that they want to pursue the truth and what's real.
And how could you do that about something that was witnessed by 12 people 2,000 years ago?
If you find evidence that, so for example, 12 people 2,000 years ago said, hey, we saw, a person flying with angel wings, and then you're able to somehow disprove it, but it's hard to disprove that. I mean, people say a lot of crazy things, and so that's why the threshold for whether something is true is not whether 12 people said it, it's whether there's evidence of it.
But that's not how you live. That's such a lie. You're giving
What do you
yourself an illusion of the way that you exist.
What do you
so
mean?
how can you prove that your wife loves you?
But I'm not.
How can you prove
I
that?
can't.
Like,
No,
that
wait, so let me.
you can't prove the things that the world that you live in is not based. Your world that you live in is based on trust, Jake.
Right.
It is not based on facts.
Come
The facts-
on. Pause it. The world that you live in is based on trust. It's not based on facts.
He just gave him the daggone pill to get out of the matrix.
Mm-hmm.
He said, you think you have the scientific process that you live by, but it's a false reality. You just trust these people that you believe followed the scientific process.
Right. Right. And you don't understand how historical evidence works. There's different categories of evidence. You don't understand how historical evidence works. And you're making a categorical error to demand the same type of quote unquote evidence and proof of is there evidence that this person assaulted this person on video camera versus is there historical precedent that the resurrection of Jesus likely happened, which then revolutionized the entire world and civilization as we know it, right? The only way you can prove by Jake's definition or any skeptic's definition if the resurrection happened is if you had a time machine and a camera. Outside of that, we're trusting the sources and the authorities based on the reliable historical evidence afforded to people at that time. You cannot apply, shout out to Pageau Center, it is impossible to apply the scientific method to historical studies. Very simple. Very, 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 very simple.
Or not
History,
acceptable.
scientific reality and history, I think, is based on facts. The way my wife.
Scientific reality is not the gospel story. And it's not the Bible. The Bible is not a scientific document. It doesn't try to be, doesn't pretend to be. All the ancient stories do not pretend to be scientific documents. They're not forensic descriptions of events, and they also don't have to be, because that's not the point.
This is perhaps Jake having interacted with some more fundamentalist types that present the Gospels or the Bible as if it's a scientific textbook, which it's not, which I think presenting it as such does more harm than good for the skeptic, in my opinion, And so maybe like if we were to extend some nuance and compassion and empathy to a Jake, perhaps that's what he's wrestling with. And a lot of Christians who, by the way, grow up in these strict fundamentalist frameworks of how they view everything in black and white end up struggling and having some of these same questions and framing things in the same way that Jake is framing things.
Yeah.
Is not to convince, is not to in a forensic manner, predict a phenomena the way that science is able to analyze and predict phenomena with like levels of facts that are necessary for that to happen. But that's not the world you live in. You don't live in that world.
I'm not going to win this argument, right? This is and if it's 6 hours, I'm not going to win this argument. By the way, I'm just sorry.
Okay, so this is where Jake starts just conceding. I'm not going to win. It's not. He just starts conceding point after point.
I don't mean to call into question your beliefs, or I don't mean to say what you think is not important or real. Like let me take a step back and get on your side about a couple things. So I think there's tremendous value in religion. I think there's tremendous value in symbolism. I think it's hard to create a moral system in the world, and I think that having these stories and rituals is incredibly important. I think that there's like deep truth to these patterns and stories that repeat themselves. Is there something deeper about us? And for those reasons, I think that holding, whether it's Christianity or Judaism or Islam or a religion close to your heart and living in accordance with those principles is so valuable. That being said, let me respond to your question specifically. There's no scientific way to prove that my wife loves me. Maybe she doesn't, right? And I'm not saying that I can prove that. And you're right, day to day, I don't make decisions, like I don't go through a scientific process to see like, should I wear a raincoat? Is it definitely going to rain today? Like, no, we make decisions based off trust, and that's how we live our lives.
So how many points has he conceded so far?
We live a life based on trust.
Religion is good. I can't prove that my wife loves me. I don't go through my life in these other ways. I have a degree of trust. So that's 3 points he just conceded.
The reason we know that Mars is a planet next to the Earth, we don't go based on trust. We go based on a scientific process. The reason we know that George Washington was the first president, same thing. The reason I don't think that the stories of the Bible actually happened is for those same reasons. I don't think that we should use trust to ascertain reality in terms of history or scientific reality. I think with my wife loving me, I'm with you that I'm not going to try to prove that.
The more that you recede into the past, the less forensic descriptions will look necessarily. the way that descriptions of things that happened a very long time ago that we're capable of remembering today will necessarily look different because of the capacity we have to care and to remember and to attend. Because if you, Pulp Fiction will be irrelevant to people in 100 years because they won't understand any of the references. They won't know what like maybe they won't even know what a gun is. They won't know they won't know anything about the details of what happens in Pulp Fiction because all their references will vanish. So if you want a story to be told in a manner that people remember and care, you have to tell it in a way that looks like a myth, not like forensic history. Forensic history is irrelevant in over a long period of time. And so what you're going to have to do is you're basically going to have to discount all things that are told for a certain period of time. And you're going to have to completely discount it because none of them are told in a way that is good enough for modern forensic analysis to ascertain its factuality.
Well, Johnathan rightfully points, like the further you go back in antiquity, the less you can verify within a scientific method. So it would probably be easier to verify the George Washington thing versus verifying Caesar Augustus.
Yep. People hunting a buffalo. We could say, wow, these people drew a picture of it. I don't know for sure that they hunted a buffalo, but like, why not? They had to eat. There were buffalo here. We see buffalo bones in North America.
Maybe they made it up.
Maybe they made it up. So they might have
made up. They made up.
But they might have made it up. I give it 50-50. I'd say 50% chance they hunted the buffalo. No, I'm dead serious. I'd say 50% chance they actually hunted elk. But they wanted to hunt buffalo and they drew a picture of it because it made them seem big and strong. And so 50% chance they hunt.
Elk are huge. You know, the difference between elk and buffalo.
Like, elk and drew a picture of a buffalo because it was a nice picture. And 50% chance that picture was a reflection of reality. And so based on that cave drawing, I could say, 50-50 because the activity they're describing holds true when we look at physics, right? Humans can hunt buffalo. Now, if they drew a picture of a UFO or if they drew a picture of something supernatural, I'd say, hold on a minute. Unlike the buffalo, which we know existed in North America around this time, we don't have as much evidence that, angels or demons existed in the same way we know that buffalo existed.
So that's like what's it called? Naturalist worldview, which is
a
like
materialist worldview.
Yeah, if miracles can't exist, then Jesus wasn't divine.
That's right. It's a circular argument.
Yeah.
I
Which
don't
is what he opened
believe,
with.
based on the laws of physics and the rules of the material world, I don't believe that miracles are possible.
Yeah.
Because I don't believe that the laws of physics in the material world, right? Like it's a circular argument.
Yeah.
So whatever percentage chance I think that the buffalo drawing happened, I'm gonna give it 50%. The drawing of the angel or demon has got to be less than that. It has to be less.
Why? Why does it have to be less than that?
I also like to point out that the more logically consistent you hold this view, the more you have to become unsure on like so many things that we're very sure about. Like, did the Native Americans hunt buffalo?
Right.
Or did the cavemen like did they hunt buffalo? We're like, I guess actually we don't know.
We don't know. We don't know. Yeah.
So let's take angels and demons, for example, or gods, like intermediary beings.
Listen closely.
The fact that every single culture in the entire world, or the entire history that we know of, has stories of these beings. That is not sufficient for you to think that there's at least something to consider here.
Oh man, he's cooking.
He's cooking this dude.
He's like, cavemen just need to give you pictures of buffalo and you're at 50-50, but the whole world gave you
every civilization has been talking about angels and demons for thousands of years.
And you're like, nah. It was 12 people that made it up.
It's all made up.
Yeah.
It's fascinating. Every human deep inside them believes has a longing for the infinite. It's a deeply human thing that
Where do you think that comes from?
It's like that's more
believe in a higher power. That's innate. That's totally, people need to believe in a life.
It's innate.
I think that's fundamental to human psychology. Absolutely.
And so it's reflective of a truth
about human psychology. Yeah, definitely.
Human psychology is not isolated from the world. It's not this thing that exists in a vacuum. It's this thing that exists in a microcosm.
But we still experience anxiety today because it is fundamental to human psychology to survive. So you're going to feel anxiety when your body thinks there's a tiger, even though we don't live in a society where there's a tiger.
Right.
We have an innate psychological desire to know a higher power. And it doesn't live in a vacuum.
Right.
That's because
there's a higher power that puts that in us.
That puts that in us. So the same way that we had to escape the tiger, we don't have to now, but we still feel anxiety is the same way we desire to know the higher power, but we have so much science and technology that feels like it's suppressed that.
Right. And again, all this is ultimately using... It's allowing the materialist person to project their definitions and their standards onto the Christians, and then we try to play along. When in reality is the questions are flawed at its basics presuppositions.
Yeah,
and it has to reflect that microcosm. Like human psychology is not something that just happened. It happened in relationship to the world. And so the idea that human psychology is completely divorced from the world.
But not everything we believe and feel happens in reality. So like it's deeply human to have
laughing at him. I love Johnathan. This.
longing for other people and to believe in angels and demons and God and heaven. I think that's like deeply human intrinsic, but that doesn't mean that necessarily heaven exists as evidenced by the fact that we think it does.
The problem, it's like, the problem is, again, if you think that heaven or angels exist at the level of animals, then you won't find any proof of them.
Right.
Because you can't find proof. So if it's like if I would say, I can't prove to you that truth exists. It's like, where's truth, buddy? Like, show me where truth is. Like,
truth is an abstract concept. Like, no, but if you're talking about historical, talking about physical, but so
angels are not physical things, and gods are not physical things.
So maybe we have a misunderstanding. Maybe we're not so far apart as I think. Because so here's where I agree with you, right? Like love, you can't prove love. Like it's in your heart, right? I believe that. Okay, I would never try to prove love. I would never try to prove truth as having objective truth. John Vervaeke and I talked about this yesterday with Zen Neoplatonism. The difference between like objective and subjective. Subjective things also have truth. The way you feel is a true thing, even though you can't point to it. You know, the space inside your head is a true thing. But the distinction I'm drawing is that if you're referring to physical things, like love and truth and space inside your head are not physical things. Consciousness is not a physical thing. Heaven and hell, angels and demon seem to me to be physical things. Like Jesus Christ was a physical.
Angels and demons are not physical things.
Jesus Christ is
no Christian, no Christian or probably Jew or probably Muslim believe that angels are physical things. That's why we say they're spirits. That's why we say they're. That they're intelligences.
But that's Jesus being born again, that's a physical. It's a physical
Jesus
person.
Is clearly a physical being.
Yeah,
that is for sure. That is a different question than the existence of angels or demons.
He's having a really hard time with where the supernatural meets the natural in Jesus.
Right. The incarnation is difficult for people.
Yeah.
The incarnation isn't just difficult for people. It's difficult for the other two main world religions. Jews and Muslims do not believe in the incarnation story.
Yeah, but even the miracles that Jesus did, he's like trying to figure. It's like, how does the supernatural blend with the physical? Right. That's where he's confused. But it seems like he's more open to the idea. Does it seem like he's more open to the idea of angels and demons existing or possibly existing than Jesus? It's a weird parallel.
The demons are not physical beings. They are agentic intelligences that act on us they act on us in ways that we recognize when we see the coherence of patterns that is acting on humans. So you can actually notice that everybody in America seems to think that America exists. I can't point to it. Where's America?
Right. There is a border. But you're right. It's like it's an abstract thing. Is it the people?
How can an American who's not in America thinks he's an American?
I agree. It would be silly for me to try to prove the existence or absence of of non-physical things. But I thought a lot of the supernatural things.
How can an American who's not an American know he's an American?
That's crazy.
But are inherently physical, like
That's a ridiculous thing. That's a ridiculous idea. The idea that supernatural is physical, then why? What does that even mean? I don't even know what that would mean. Something that we find difficult to explain happens. It has to have happened. And so the miracles are, how can I say this? Miracles are not just freak events. The best way to understand miracles is to understand that they are things happening in the world that are showing a level of meaning that is higher than the one we're used to seeing.
Miracles are the exception to the rule, and they are they're evidence that something is beyond this world that's happening, and therefore that is meaningful.
Yeah.
Right? The resurrection is meaningful because it doesn't happen all the time.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? That is what makes it a miracle.
Yeah.
And so I think it's like, it's the notion that like supernatural things always happen. Well, there's a supernatural realm. That doesn't mean supernatural things always happen. It doesn't mean we're always bending the rules of physics and the laws of the universe or the laws of this material world all the time. No. They're the exception to the rule. That's what makes them miraculous.
This is the analogy of strong emergence to understand what a miracle is that the constituent elements of the being do not account for the higher manifestation, right? So it's like there's nothing in hydrogen and oxygen that accounts for the qualities of water. Sure. That's a miracle. That's a miracle because the water.
Talking serpent, that's physical, right?
Well, yeah, of course, the talking serpent is physical, but that's like you go into Genesis, man. That's a difficult one. Like going into Genesis is a difficult one because that's an old story.
My only point, hopefully my last point, because I hate to drag you into this, is my final point is we're both in agreement that it's silly for me to try to prove or disprove something non-physical like love or truth, anything like that. And then my point was, okay, but I think when it comes to physical things, events, people, history, then we're allowed to say things like, is this true or not? And then you were saying, well, angels and demons are not physical. What are you talking about? And so the point I'm trying to make now is that I'm referring specifically to pick whatever example you want. Jesus, serpent, whatever you want. When it comes to physical things, we're not talking about love anymore. We're talking about something physical. And I'm saying, maybe I've lost myself here. But you see what I'm saying? There's a distinction between angels, demons versus is a physical thing that I'm saying.
A miracle. You're talking specifically about miracles.
If the cavemen drew photos of people flying, I would say I'm not convinced.
I'm pretty sure they did, by the way.
I would say I'm not convinced. They saw a bird, they had a rock, and they stretched it into the wall. Maybe there was a flying person, but my point is that drawing on the wall, that ain't sufficient. Ain't not sufficient.
So a caveman draws humans.
Yeah.
Like little sticks.
Yeah.
And then he draws a human. He draws a being flying in the air.
Would you believe anything he drew?
You think it's a forensic description of a physical event, even though he draws humans like little sticks. Because you're not a little stick, by the way.
Do you believe everything the caveman's going to draw? You don't believe everything You don't believe everything he's going to draw, right?
What does that even mean? What do you mean? You don't believe everything that he draws? I don't understand the question.
A caveman can draw.
It seems like the purpose of your life is to ascertain the factuality of things, which I guarantee you that is not the purpose of your life. Like, I guarantee you that the purpose of your life is not to ascertain the factuality of everything you encounter.
Come on.
No, okay.
Come on.
And I keep saying, this is the final point.
Like, if there's anything Johnathan could have left him with, is like, bro, the purpose of your life is not to ascertain whether or not everything you come into contact with is a fact.
Yeah.
That is not the point. And you are approaching this in an area, and you're creating standards for the category of faith that you don't have for any other area. Like, it's just such a double standard, illogical way to approach everything.
So I think you and I live in two different worlds, like completely different worlds. It's very simple. If someone draws a buffalo flying, my first question is why? Why he cared enough about a buffalo flying to draw a buffalo flying?
Yeah.
Yes.
So what's important is the meaning.
Yes.
I cannot ascertain what happened 10,000 years ago.
Right.
I have no way of doing that.
Right.
And so why would I try to ascertain? What I'm interested in is what it means.
This is interesting because I think this is like a intellectual skeptic with the paradigm that all intellectuals are the modern understanding of intellectuals, which is we love science and facts, and we just sit around and talk about science and facts.
Yes.
Like, but Johnathan Pageau is in the circle that is we're actually hyper creatives and intellectuals, and we obsess more over meaning and iconography and story and the philosophy of human existence, not cosmological arguments and like all of these things. So this is like, so that's why he's like, we just live in fundamentally different worlds. Like, you think you're talking to an intellectual that's trying to do apologetics, but you're talking to an intellectual that's talking about like meaning and
symbols.
story and symbolism and what God's communicating to us. First of all, I appreciate his good faith argument. Like, he's really interested, which is awesome. And then also he's new. Like, he has 277 subscribers. So he's probably, as far as like, I mean, maybe he's a seasoned communicator, but he's definitely a new communicator from this interview content perspective. So I think there's some grace for him there.
I mentioned between me and my sister's dad, I became religious, and I left that experience with a lot of resentment, to be honest. I felt that I was a vulnerable person who was trying to be convinced of this. And so now I'm married to a Christian woman, and if I believe in Judaism, then I'm either going to go to hell or I'm going to not. So I'm personally biased. I have a personal motivation to not
try to figure this stuff out.
To not believe in it.
This he's dealing with tension from something tragic that happened in his personal life, which is sad. And then he's now dealing with a Christian woman that he's married to that's probably praying for him.
And now he's on the line with Johnathan Pageau.
She's like, oh my gosh,
her prayers are working.
That he would talk to a Christian, then he's interviewing Johnathan Pageau. Johnathan Pageau is a ninja with all these arguments.
I have a personal motivation to not
try to figure this stuff out.
To not believe in it. So that's just, we don't have to make.
Jonathan's like, try to figure this out. No, because I don't want to believe in it.
I agree, and I mean, I find problematic when people use scientific type descriptions. Like, I flee archaeological arguments, all this stuff. I flee it like the plague because science, by the way, it's interesting because science is the very opposite of certainty. Science is not certainty. Science is, every scientific discovery has an expiration date on it. You don't know what the expiration date is, but that expiration date is there. And all scientific discoveries and archaeological discoveries and all these things, they're all there temporarily until something else comes up. And that is not the type of foundation that you base your life on.
Go watch the rest of the conversation. Johnathan does a phenomenal job of having this conversation. Jake is clearly on a journey. I wish he would have opened up with that, but I think he, even in saying that, he showed his hand that he needs this to be false because of the negative experience he had, and because now being married to a Christian, he's committed to this. But the issue is, if he reads the experience of other people who've gone down this journey, if he's reading the experience of Elise Strobel, if he's reading the experience of Cold Case Christianity, the more you go down this path, the more you have good faith conversations, the more likely you're going to be convinced that you're actually wrong. After the incredible success of our Bless God prayer journal, many of you guys began to ask for something that had a planner. And so we combined our Bless God prayer journal with a brand new leadership planner that jam-packs the same things from our prayer journal with a planner, goal setting, leadership meeting, and notes. With the next pages, you can see different sections right along here of this leadership planner where you can start out with actionable goals, 12 months of calendar, our original prayer journal prompts, our leadership journal with the proven problem solution framework, and of course, just free write notes. This leadership planner is based off of Matthew 25:14-30, which of course is the parable of the talents. The vision of the planner is to help you make the most of your time, talent, and treasure. Head over to blessgod.shop and get yours today. All right, I'll see you over there. Peace.